Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Gilded Outhouse. I am the Moon Crier, and I am your shaman for tonight. Today, we have a very, very special review on the day this is being posted, January 20th, 2024. We will be celebrating 60 years of probably one of the most important albums ever released in music history. You can ask any contemporary of the 1960s, and they said the moment they really wanted to step up their game of music. You have all these like folkies, all these kind of rockabilly acts. And you kind of have all these folkies, these kind of rockabilly acts. They're just basically kind of strumming their acoustic guitar. They were very much enamored by acts like Elvis Presley, Chuck Berry, Little Richard, and so on back then. But they were kind of sticking to this very safe kind of thing. At that point, rock and roll was kind of a not so good thing. Elvis, as he famously once knew, he went to the army and basically got cucked. We had Chuck Berry, who was doing some pretty nasty stuff. And if you want to talk about nasty stuff, you can get at Jerry Lee Lewis, who literally married his 13-year-old cousin and absolutely slaughtered his career because of that. Killer move there. And then, of course, you have Little Richard, who basically decided, you know what? I'm done. I am absolutely done with rock and roll. It's sinful. I'm going to become a gospel singer. That worked for all about 2 years, and he went back to the rock and roll and never looked back. But at that point, it just became kind of just dumb. Rock and roll was just very much it seemed like a fad in a way. Even the guy that promoted Alan Freed, he was out of a job. He was the guy that pretty much got rock and roll off with the start, and he was just basically a bum on the streets. Poor guy. He was dealt a very dirty hand. But anyway, luckily, he was still able to at least get a taste of what the future was and what a lot of people saw when this album came out. That is right. The absolutely astounding Meet the Beatles. It just is pounding out of every single radio station. Everyone just fell in love with this album immediately. It's pretty much like a lightning bolt struck. And the next thing you knew, everybody wanted to be like the Beatles. You could see it with Roger McGuinn. You could see it with Bob Dylan. It was just, the influence was absolutely enormous. So, what was it that made this album so influential? Well, today I hope to dissect this album like I'm about to do surgery on a grape right now and figure out that very reason. Okay, just to give you a little bit of a temperature check to show you just how the state of music was before the Beatles came along. I found this Capitol Inner Sleep. I think this is from, I'd say 1964, but it reflects kind of the music of about 62-ish to like when the Beatles burst on the scene. In fact, some of the early Beatles albums have this on here. They don't advertise any Beatle records because they didn't expect it to go anywhere. And as you get into some of the liner notes on some of these albums, you'll start to see that. But as you can see here, this is the blue one. And you'll see a lot of the popular acts at the time. You had Frank Sinatra, of course. The Letterman. You had Bobby Darin, known for like Mac the Knife. They have Mac the Knife on there. They have Reverend Mr. Black, though. But big singer Al Martino. You had some of your swooners. You had Wanda Jackson was there. She was a bit of a rock star. And so like Fujiyama Mama. Hank Thompson. You had some of these kind of slower stuff. You had the Kingston Trio. Folk was huge at the time. And, of course, Reverend Mr. Black was a huge, huge song. This was Nat Cole. I mean, you had the Beach Boys, but that was about as rock as you can get. I think as you see here, I guess Dick Dale, Judy Garland. Judy Garland live at Carnegie Hall. Absolutely historical record right there. But this was kind of what we had. Peggy Lee, too. This is what we had. This was what was being played on the radio. This is what the adults were buying as well. This was the music for everyone. There wasn't as much of a thing going on until, as you can see here, This is probably around late 1964. I have a copy of Beatles 65, one of my million copies of it at home. And once again, they pretty much just gave up on this, like, sort of older audience. And they're like, okay, fuck it, we're going to go for the teens now. Join the teen set. You don't see anything about a teen set on here. Nope. You got it right here. It is join the teen set on Capitol. Here's what you'll receive. An official teen set membership card. A specifically selected 45 RPM single record by one of America's favorite teen artists. Your next special bonus for joining the teen set. Information on how you can get fan photos for your favorite recording stars. Details in the great issue of Teen Set magazine available to where you buy records. And, of course, they're going to talk about some of the big acts. The Beach Boys, Beatles, Cilla Black, same artist under manager Brian Epstein's contract. Glenn Campbell, who also helped tour with the Beach Boys. Bobby Darin, Dick Dale. Once again, it kind of went away from that sort of... Well, they have all the stuff on the back. But just look how it's just relegated to just the opposite side right here. This is the shit people were buying, basically. And I guess there's that too. We'll get into that later. Anyway, but it was really good to show this the absolute shift in how you went from, I guess you can consider maybe one or two of these records being more targeted at a younger audience to just having the complete side. Here you got Meet the Beatles, second album, something new. You even got a couple Beach Boys records on here, Dick Dale, the history of drag racing, the Shutdown compilation, and I guess that's some way to also market the Beatles to older audiences with the Hollywood strings. They also did it for the Beach Boys as well. Good to know. Funny story before we switch back. I have seen one of these filled out before, and they put my three favorite recording stars, like I think it's like Beatles, Beach Boys, and the Rolling Stones. I don't know what they'd say about that. I'm sorry to disappoint you. Rolling Stones are on I think they're on Decca. Anyway, the whole story behind Meet the Beatles is fascinating. It seems like this album almost didn't come out at all. In fact, I could say it right now. Back in 1964, Capitol Records, who owned the rights to the American Beatles catalog, I'm just going to say this right now. Capitol Records, who owned the rights to publish the Beatles songs in America, did not give a single rat's pituitary gland. How so? It's a British group. British groups never worked in America. They saw these songs that were popping off, and they're like, no, we can't. If we put this out, it's going to be a flop. Because at this point, the Beatles already had a whole album of recorded material. They had Please Please Me. They had a couple singles. At this point, they had She Loves You. Please Please Me was a single itself. They had Love Me Do, which, yeah, to be fair, that probably couldn't have hit well in the States. But at this point, the Beatles were putting together with the Beatles, which basically the cover was like this, but it was in black and white, and it wasn't as poppy as this one. This one's a little bit more, I'd say, the original UK cover was a lot more stylized in terms of, it was supposed to be this kind of sleek, very much sophisticated look, which was pretty much the Beatles' way of showing we are not some ordinary rock band. We are a little bit more than that. But at this point, they're pretty much getting that album done, and they also released a single to go along with it called I Want to Hold Your Hand. And there was a point where eventually there was some pressure, because in the UK the Beatles were going off around the world, just talking about in Europe especially. And there's some executives saying, okay, you just gave up an album's worth of material, the rights, to some independent Chicago-based jazz label, and they're gonna call it Introducing the Beatles. They're gonna be first. Wait, and also those singles, Please Please Me and Love Me, dude, those are coming out. Oh no, not Thank You Girl either. So what about She Loves You? I mean, that song is like a #1 in the UK. Oh, that's off the Swan label. Hold up, hold up, hold up. So you're saying you're not publishing these songs? We need to get one out now. So, with that being said, they decide, all right, let's get them out. What also happened too was some radio DJ was able to get a hold of I Want to Hold Your Hand at this point. This is the newly released single in the UK. And they started playing it. And they were playing, and like, at that point, people were just like ripping off from that station. They started playing on their own stations. And then Capitol's like, okay, that's it. We're releasing I Want to Hold Your Hand as a single. I can't do this anymore. We're losing out on so much money right now. So they did. Not only did they, but they rush released it after there was a backlog of orders coming in saying, we need this song. And so they did. And I guess there's no other way to have a single than to have an album. So yeah, why not? I'd say, because I Want to Hold Your Hand came out for around the Christmas season, they decided to hold off on compiling the album, see how it does, for them to release this in January, which is basically, just like in the movies, a music dead time. Womp womp. Anyway, so they went over, and they saw that I Want to Hold Your Hand hit #1. The Beatles saw that, and they went, oh shit, we gotta actually tour America now. And this just also helped in general. Once Meet the Beatles hit, everyone ate it up, and it became the #1 for about at least 4 months before that was replaced by the Beatles' second album. But this still stayed in the charts for pretty much the entirety of the rest of the decade, which is just absolutely insane that one album could just last it for so long. I mean, you can look now on the charts and see that like Fleetwood Mac Rumors, or actually Abbey Road, are still on the charts, middling on the charts. This was like in the top 10, which is just absolutely, I just can't comprehend that. That is like if one of Taylor Swift's records, we'll just say 1989, the OG version, not the Tay-Tay version, was still on like the top 10 for just from, I guess, because it came out like 10 years ago, and it's still like on the charts right now. That's not really exactly happening. It's the Tay-Tay version that's on there. But I digress. We are going to get into the how this was sold, which it came out on mono and stereo. This is a 1970s stereo copy. I do have an original mono pressing at home that has a beautiful skip in one of those songs. Thanks, children. Anyway, and this one it's very nice. It's in the shrink too, and as you can see here, Gold Record Award. That was a big deal. That means you sold 1 million units, and this album was platinum. So I mean, crazy. So what they did was they pasted the cover to With the Beatles, and they said, you know what, black and white, pretty dreary. Let's make it blue. It makes it look more exciting. And I agree. I like the blue tint better. It really kind of brings this kind of a bit more of a mystical awe to them. And it's like, ooh, the Blue Man Group. And of course they have Meet the Beatles, which depending on the location you got it. If you bought this record on the east side, you got it in brown. You bought it on the west side, you got it in green. And they pretty much have it as the first album. It's not. It is not the first album by them. And I'm not even talking about in the UK, of course, it's far from. But when it comes to, this is not even the first album in the US, because that old Chicago label, VJ, They had that one in about a couple days earlier, actually, for introducing the Beatles, which is basically the Please Please Me, but they truncated it to 12 songs, which is just an absolute war crime on humanity. Um, Basically, what they did was they had one introducing the Beatles, Be Love Me Do, and the other one was Please Please Me as like the main single. It was a whole mess, and we'll get into that when we talk about the early Beatles. Anyway, there it is, the first album by England's phenomenal pop combo. In fact, you even put in there as pop, rock, vocal group. They even had little file unders, which I just always thought was cool. When you flip it on the back, you can see is that if you've read about them in Time, Newsweek, the New York Times, here's the big beat sound of that fantastic, phenomenal foursome, Meet the Beatles. And you have a picture of them right here. This was kind of taken in that prime, I guess, matching suits era, which really did not last long. And they have them all up there. They're having a jolly old time. You always wonder what Paul's exactly laughing at, and why he just seems so separated from the group. It's always made me wonder. And with that being said, I'm going to read the liner notes for you. So, a year ago, which were written by... It doesn't say, but we're going to roll with it. A year ago, the Beatles were only known to patrons of Liverpool pubs. Today, there isn't a Britisher who doesn't know their names, and their fames have spread quickly around the world. Said one American visitor to England, only a hermit could be unaware of the Beatles, and he'd have to be beyond range of television, newspapers, radio, records, and rioting fans. That's right. So there's even rumors about girls who would like piss in their seats watching the Beatles. There's a very angry theater employee that complained about that famously back in about 1964, 1965. Anyway, said another, they're the biggest, hottest property in the history of English show business. The foursome, John Lennon, 23, George Harrison, 20, Ringo Starr, 23, and Paul McCartney, 21, write, play, and sing a powerhouse music filled with zest and uninhibited good humor that makes listening a sensation-filled joy. It isn't rhythm and blues. It's not exactly rock and roll. It's their own special sound, or as group leader Lennon puts it, all music. Well, it's just, all music, you bastards. Whatever it is, the Beatles' robust roaring sound has stimulated a reaction the English themselves describes as Beatlemania. Consider these manifestations. In Newcastle, England, 4,000 fans stood out all night in pouring rain to get tickets for a Beatles appearance. In Portsmouth, the queues started 90 hours before the box office opened. Teenagers bought food, drink, blankets, and transistor radios, and two determined 16-year-old girls spent 4 nights outside to hold their place in queue. They're probably 54th in line. In Carlisle, frantic schoolgirls battled police for 4 hours in a do-or-die effort to gain admission to a sold-out show. In Dublin, Ireland, the Beatles' first visit set off a mob free-for-all, resulting in unnumbered broken limbs. You see, you basically have to cut your head off. It's like just to watch a Beatles thing. You're going to be coming out looking like Edward Elric or something. Oh, it cost me an arm and a leg. At London Airport, reporter Anna Butler has had her gloved hand kissed repeatedly by youngsters who saw it accidentally brush the back of a Beatle. It was probably George. Similar wild enthusiasm has greeted the Beatles in such disparate places as Sweden, where frenzied girls swarmed to pop up into the stage, Germany, Finland, and France, and the acclaim recently brought them one of the highest of all entertainment honors, an appearance before Princess Margaret, the Queen Mother, and Lord Snowdon at the Royal Variety Performance in London. We'll get to that later. And the records? Oh, the records! In America, a total sale of 1 million discs calls for celebration, gold records, trade news headlines, and delirious self-congratulations. Yeah, like y'all didn't absolutely just brush them off. I bet these aren't even your sales records, you bozos. A recent Beatles recording had an advance order of 1 million copies in the United Kingdom. 3 weeks before release, it's italicized. So, 3 weeks! Whoa! And simultaneously, the Beatles occupy positions 1 and 2 in the hit singles charts, and 1 and 2 in the album charts. A phenomenal achievement anywhere. Now, the Beatles are getting a royal welcome in America. Ed Sullivan, very, very famous late night show host back in the 60s, pretty much also in the 50s too. It's more in the 50s, 60s. He hosts a lot of people. Elvis Presley, which he famously filmed from the hips up because, oh, God forbid, they actually show him doing his little dancing, They had the Doors there. They had the Byrds. Pretty much anybody you'd expect. It was the variety hour. What is America watching? Oh, watch on the Ed Sullivan Show. It's that big of a deal. But it is Ed Sullivan signed him for 3 appearances in rapid succession on his Sunday night TV show, prime time. There was no Sunday Night Football at the time. People were watching on CBS. They are shortly to film in England a feature-length United Artists movie for worldwide release. We'll get to that later too. And here is their first Capitol record. 12 of their most sensational songs in the wildest Beatlemaniac style. Produced by George Martin. Cover photo by Robert Freeman. Nothing about Dave Dexter yet. We will definitely get into him right now. So, basically, they really gas these guys up. I mean, they have to. They got to make money, as you can see. And really, it's just kind of amazing to see how already it just goes to show how much Capitol was lollygagging on getting these guys out. Because it's just crazy. Just crazy. By the time that was going on, they already had A Hard Day's Night lined up. So just to show the absolute impact that the Beatles had, and not even just the Beatles, this album in particular, on how music was shaped over the next 3 decades, and even onward. I'm gonna show you some pretty big names here. We got David Crosby, who says here, the Beatles were our heroes. They were absolutely what we wanted to do. We listened to every note they played and savored it, rubbed it in our foreheads, and were duly affected by it. I was in Chicago living with a British guy named Clem Floyd on Well Street, right in the middle of it all. I was singing at Old Town North and Mother Blues. I was trying to quit smoking, and the way I figured to quit was to buy a quarter pound of pot, which I rolled and smoked every time I wanted a cigarette. I'm not saying try this at home, kids, but it worked. So here I was, in high old state of affairs with Clem. Walked in one album with that first Beatles album, Meet the Beatles. He put it on, and I just didn't know what to think. It absolutely floored me. Those are folk music changes, but it's got rock and roll backbeat. You can't do that. But they did. Holy yikes. I ate it for breakfast. The Byrds never tried to imitate the Beatles, ever. We always had more ideas than we needed about how to do it our own way. I don't think anybody would say that the Byrds stuff sounded like the Beatles. The Beatles certainly didn't think so. They told us they liked our music because it really was our music. Side 1 is, of course, the hit singles. So they put I Want to Hold Your Hand as the number 1, which, it's another way, that's the song everybody knows. It's catchy. It gets you right in. And something I also like about it is that, unlike a lot of the songs on here, it actually feels like it's playing in both sides of my headphones. They basically, long story short, the Beatles tapes on these, they were basically given the mono ones. And what they did was, since they didn't have the actual, true stereo versions, except for one, we'll get to that later, what happened was that they decided to get the mono version and then split the instruments and then put it on both sides of the headphones. So instead of just hearing the same sound coming in, you hear the vocals on this side, and you hear the guitar, and the drum will be here, the bass would be here. It was a complete mess, as you can see. They talk about it here as the full dimensional stereo. You can even see it on the top there. It was pretty much marketing hack genius. And when I listened to it, it didn't really sound that bad. But I Want to Hold Your Hand, just the absolute hit single. it's a Beatles song that pretty much everybody knows, and it's the perfect start of this completely energetic album. And once again, they go to the flip side for the American version, which the American UK versions of the single were very different. The flip side for I Want to Hold Your Hand in America was I Saw Her Standing Here. What the flip side for the American version of the I Want to Hold Your Hand single was I Saw Her Standing There, which was the first song on the Beatles' first album, Please Please Me. And that was one that Capitol was barely able to get away with putting on the album. They had to pay a temporary royalty to VJ because they were the first ones to get it. So those cost a bit of money to put on there, so they didn't want to release everything until they got the rights back, and then they put it all together on the early Beatles. But yeah, I have an old oldie on there with I Saw Her Standing There. And the next song they get into is This Boy, which is the original flip side for the I Want to Hold Your Hand single, which I was kind of surprised that they put this on the new remixes for the Red album. I was a bit surprised. It's a bit of a deeper cut, and I can see why. It's a very big change of pace because you're already getting into these two energetic songs of I Want to Hold Your Hand, I Saw Her Standing There, which are just like leaders in general. They could just lead off any album, special, and that's what they did. And to have that back to back, it's good to kind of like mellow and listen to this kind of softer song with the acoustic guitar. It's also one of those songs that is played in that full stereo. You can actually hear the whole thing instead of having it all chopped up. And after that, it pretty much gets into the normal With the Beatles track, where what they did was they put all the like Lennon, McCartney, and a Harrison song originals in there. They did not really roll with the covers, because With the Beatles had a good mix of cover songs, which were later put onto the second album, and it just makes sense for a first impression. It's good to have the original songs on there to really show what they could do. There was one song, however, that wasn't a Lennon McCartney / Harrison original, but we'll get to that. And so it goes through kind of the normal track listing of With the Beatles if you just took out the covers. So you had It Won't Be Long, All I've Gotta Do, All My Loving, which I have to highlight again is just amazing how an album track that's literally like pretty much in the gutter of the album just absolutely just blew up as one of the definitive canon of the Beatles hits. And it probably also helped that they played it on the Ed Sullivan Show back in 1964 as like the lead-off song. So it starts off with the Close Your Eyes, and just absolutely just shot up to the stratosphere. Everybody was watching that Ed Sullivan Show. It still holds records as one of the most watched programs per capita. It's over 70 million people, which, I mean, granted, I will give you a lot of Super Bowl broadcasts do pass that, but when it came to the population at the time, I don't think we even had we did have a full 50 states, and people were still watching. In fact, there's even reports that happened, rumblings that crime stopped for about their 20-minute performance because everyone was just too busy watching the Beatles play their first set on Ed Sullivan. And All My Lovin' was the song that they hit it off with. And then you flip it over, you have Don't Bother Me, which was George Harrison's first song that he wrote for the group. And I always like this one. It's very much kind of a surfer kind of guitar from it. Well, definitely one of his more underrated songs. He never really talked about it in his autobiography either, which is just kind of odd. But there's a bunch he didn't talk about. I'm just always perplexed about. But a lot of people say, oh, it's kind of rough, but I think it's kind of one of the best songs off the album, if you ask me. And it was good to also hear it. The amount of echo and reverb that's drenched in it, it adds a big oomph to it, and it just really shines on Don't Bother Me. And after that is the harmonica classic Little Child. That it does sound rough, but the harmonica solo completely makes up for it. Then there's Till There Was You, which is actually a cover. Huzzah! Basically, it was off The Music Man, which was a favorite of Paul McCartney's. He was very much the most instrumentally talented. He had the biggest knowledge of music out of everyone there. He can play so many instruments. In fact, he can make whole albums on his own. Those McCartney albums. That is just him doing everything. And so he had a very broad knowledge of musicals in general. Well, everyone was just kind of, oh, we're rockers, we're modders, we're mockers. And he sang this one at the Royal Variety Hour, and you could tell he was definitely very much nervous because you could see there, and it's a good break from also having two back-to-back energetic songs. I will say the sequencing on this is just amazing, because once you get off of that, you were just thrown into this absolute chaotic euphoria with "Hold Me Tight," where there's like voice cracks galore. It's amazing. I love that song. And then "I Want to Be Your Man," which became more famous as being one of the Rolling Stones hit songs that they covered. The Beatles wrote it first. In fact, literally, John Lennon talked about how they wrote the song literally when they're eating lunch with Mick Jagger and Keith Richards and Brian Jones and Charlie Watts. Because it's like, oh, we need a hit single. We did this Chuck Berry cover, and we kind of need something else. And they're like, okay, we'll write you a song. So they wrote "I Want to Be Your Man." The Stones released it. It hit off. So the Beatles decided to release it and have Ringo sing it. And it's definitely one of Ringo Starr's better singing efforts. It also helps that Lennon and McCartney do a very strong backing. You can kind of hear it, especially with the duophonic. You can hear all the different backing vocals and front vocals and really kind of hear the stems of the music. And "I Want to Be Your Man" is one of those songs like that. And then it kind of ends with the dreary "Not a Second Time." I don't say dreary in a bad way, because it's just kind of one of those, kind of like a breakup song, a relationship insecurity song. And it has this piano that George Martin does. It just sounds amazing. How it does a little piano solo there with rock. It's just how the Beatles were able to incorporate so many different instruments and just made this unique sound. It's one of those songs that really helps illustrate it. But yeah, something else I wanted to get into on this album is that what also, besides just the track listings of these, what really makes these albums so unique are how they sound. So I was talking about the duophonic earlier, but you listen to it in mono or stereo, you are not listening to the British mixes. It's a completely different thing. They prepped them very differently. So they had this producer who was in charge of the foreign markets, which, think about it. I know it's sometimes hard to believe, but yeah, Britain, foreign country, crazy. Named Dave Dexter Jr., and he was more into doing some of the other stuff, because you have a bunch of other foreign stuff. It'd be more classical and whatnot, more traditional. And he got this rock record. He's like, man, why? I don't want to do this shit. And I mean, yeah, I couldn't blame him. You got to do a job, but regardless, there's a job to do. And he said, okay, want to make this sound good? I can barely hear this playing on AM radio. So what do? We get some reverb, we get some echo, we put that into a big crock pot, we let it simmer for a couple hours. Is it a little dry? No, we need to wet it up a little bit, put more echo, more reverb in. For the stereo version, make it a little more saucy and wet. And what do you get? You basically get a completely different sound. Like, in essence, it does sound similar, but at the same time, just hearing the echo and all the other audio effects that Dexter added really helped strengthen this album for me. It just it feels like it's like I'm like right there with them while they're playing. It's just it sounds so amazing. Um, it's like I'm not really I just absolutely love it. I love being in a cave and listening to my records. And I know a lot of people have problems with that. And really, I mean, I get it. It's not what the Beatles intended. But at the same time, if it's entertaining, who cares? And despite Apple Corps doing their best Joseph Stalin impersonation by attempting to erase these albums from the history of recorded time, luckily you can still find so many ways to enjoy listening to these songs as God intended. First off, record player. You could find these pretty much anywhere. You want to go on Discogs, you can find a decent copy for like $10. I want to get super nice copy. So this one's about 20. This was the 70s one. No one wants to buy the 70s ones. I actually recommend the 70s ones because if you get a 60s one, you will get a trashed one that some teenager used to wipe their ass with. Not fun. I can tell you from personal experience. Anyway, so I would not recommend those. I straight away looking for some of the later pressings. Your wallet, and well, thank you. So you don't have to go out and buy another one of these. And if you're not really a vinyl guy, well, rip bozo. Regardless, if you're not really much of a vinyl guy and you want to listen to these, good luck on streaming. They're just not there. However, if you're willing to pay for some money, I know a guy who knows a guy who knows a guy who knows a seller on Amazon who can get you this amazing CD set called the Beatles Capitol Albums. They came out in 2004 for the 40th anniversary, and they have Meet the Beatles second album, Something New, and of course Beatles 65 by just in these little CD formats. They even have the vinyl covers and whatnot. They even have all the liner notes, and they're like in a little CD size. And they have all the mixes. They have it both in mono and stereo, and they sound amazing. I blast them in my car all the time when I'm driving around. They just highly recommended. And other than that, you could also probably find it on cassette, 8-track. You can still find it anywhere. Luckily, you can't destroy physical media. So it is just, you want to listen to history in the making, Meet the Beatles. So, that is all for today. I hope you enjoyed. Up next, we have to review the greatest album of all time, the Beatles' second album. Stay tuned for that.